Hi, and welcome to our tutorial on requirement management. Now, for those of you who have already seen our project management video, you should already have a good idea of how this works. Requirements management works through Innovia, which is the same program we already showed you as we demonstrated project management. In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to organize your requirements in a way that's going to be useful to you as you go through your project. So let's get started. Now, I'm already in the requirements management tool here, but to access this, all I have to do is come from my dashboard, go to the social and collaborative tools section, and then scroll down and look for this icon, the requirements tool, which you'll find near the bottom right there. And that's just going to open up this same tool, this same tab. Now, the first thing that we're going to want to do is kind of structure the hierarchy for these requirements. And what we're going to do is start with a requirement specification. I'm going to come into this menu here and go to Create Requirement Specification right there. A requirement specification is essentially just a folder in which all of the requirements for your project are going to be located. So we're going to create this now. So you can see it has a name as well as a title. The title is the item that you see in this menu over here, and the name is simply a call out that it needs to have so that the computer can locate this specification at any time. So let's go ahead and give this a name. We're going to call this Our Project. Now you can give it a description if you'd like. By default, you will be named as the owner, and we have enough here to move on. So I'm going to go ahead and say Create and Close. And it's going to open that requirement specification for us. There it goes. Okay, so now I just have to come down and find that requirement specification. So let's just go ahead and grab that out of our list here. Let's see Our Project. There it is. I'm just going to select right on the name, and it's going to open that folder for us. There we go. Now we are in that folder, and now all of the requirements and all of the subdivisions that we want to make, we can associate back to this project. Make sure that you create that specification first. It's going to simplify this whole process a lot more for you. Now at this point, we could go ahead and just start adding in requirements, but I want to subdivide this a little bit more so I can keep them kind of separate. So let's start by selecting our specification, and now I can come up here and say Insert New, and we're going to say Chapter. And a chapter works essentially like the tabs that you would put in a physical binder or folder to separate the individual requirements from each other. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come in here and say that this is all of the requirements that have to do with flight. Again, I can add a description just like before. That looks good for now, and I'm going to go ahead and create that. There it goes. And let's create another chapter, and this one we are going to call Control. And so on. So I'm splitting up the different functions of my project. So whatever the different requirements, however you want to group them and however you want to organize them, that's up to you. That could have something to do with kind of the main points that your customer wants to reach. It could have to do with different subcomponents or any of those things to help you kind of subdivide your project. Now, these subdivisions aren't always going to be exact. If you notice here, I have flight and control, but at this point, that's okay. I'll show you how we can deal with that a little bit down the road. All right, so now we're ready to go ahead and create some requirements. So I'm going to select flight. We're going to go Insert New, and this time we're going to go right to Requirements. There's also a comment object. This is more of a note that you can add into your structure. Maybe it's something to keep in mind, but not necessarily a requirement. Maybe your customer prefers red as a color. That might not be a requirement to create a successful project, but it might be something to tell you, hey, when we decide the aesthetics of this project, we're going to use a lot of red. So let's go ahead and create a requirement. And the requirement's going to give us a little bit more to work with here. Again, I can give it a title, so we're on flight. So this could be something like cruise speed 500 feet per second. I'm just making up numbers here, but we can add in some content, some further description here, and then down here is where it gets a little bit more interesting. We can decide a priority, and a difficulty. And this kind of helps us organize our requirements so that we can hit the big things first and maybe leave some of the smaller priority things for later. So what you want to be looking for is the high priority, low difficulty, get those things out of the way. High priority, high difficulty, you can get to that a little bit later, and so on. So I'm just gonna leave both of these at low for now. We'll change that on another one. You can add in a customer, you can add in a category. We've already kind of taken care of the category with the chapter, so I'm just gonna leave it that way. I can also decide if this is a functional requirement, so it's a requirement based on making our project work. Non-functional can be something like this is something that the customer wants, but maybe the machine will still function without it. And a constraint, which is simply trying to kind of bound the project. You know, it cannot cost more than $6,000 to produce. I'm just going to leave it at functional. You'll find most of your requirements end up being functional. And no matter which classification you use, the requirement will still function essentially the same. So I'll go ahead and create that and close. And there is our first requirement. Shows up right in the list there. Now I added this number here to the title. That's just for reference for me. You don't have to have the exact number. This could have just been cruise speed, and that's the requirement. And I'll show you a little bit later how we can add some parameters to these. Let's go ahead and add a control item. So I'm going to say insert new requirement. And this one I'm going to use the same example from before. So I'm just going to say it needs to be able to pitch, we'll say 40 degrees. Now I'm going to go down here and I'm actually going to change these. Let's see, we'll set a medium priority and a high difficulty. There we go, create that. And there it is. And now we can see that difference. So here we see that is a low difficulty, low priority situation. This is a high difficulty, medium priority requirement. And so that way I can actually see which items I need to address first, which ones I might be able to leave till later, and you can move through the process that way. Now, like I explained before, this pitch 40 degrees could fit in either of these categories. Now this point is really up to you. If you just want to see the whole list and see fewer requirements and just kind of focus on the ones that need being done first, that's okay. A lot of teams might subdivide the team based on sections of categories, however. So if, for example, I'm part of the flight team, I would not even see that control requirement there as I'm working on these flight requirements. I'm just focusing on one chapter. And because I can't see that pitch control thing, I might forget it in the process of working through the requirements that seem to be associated with what I'm doing. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to move this pitch 40 degrees requirement so that it's located in both of these chapters. Now what that means is it's going to be one requirement, so any progress that we want to show on that requirement, any notes that we want to make, will be associated with its position in both chapters. I'm going to go ahead, leave this on flight, and I'm going to come up here and say insert existing this time, and I'm going to insert an existing requirement. And there it goes. Now I can come up here and search, and that was, and there it is right there. I can select on that, hit OK. And now we see there it is. Pitch 40 degrees is now located in both of these chapters. So now what I'm going to do is add a note, a description to this pitch 40 degrees. Let's go ahead and activate edit mode. Now this edit or modify mode is going to be available on every page in Enovia, and this is always what you want to do if you want to come and change some detail like the priority or any of those things on one of these requirements. So I'm going to enable that, and that's now going to allow me to come in here and just open this description section. Need to be able to go up and down. Alright, hit apply, and now I'm going to save that change. Now notice it might take a little bit for this detail to show up, but you can see that now. It's changed that detail on each of these. If I come back in here and change the priority or the difficulty, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to change both of those requirements, which can be good and bad. It's going to require some management of your team to make sure that you're on the same page about a requirement. Now this is a great tool so that you can keep track of the requirements that are cross-functional, you can keep track of what the other teams are doing and the progress of this requirement. Now, as a note of caution, that also means that you would have members of different teams, separate teams, that could be working on the same requirement, and there's the possibility of one of those members actually marking this pitch 40 degrees requirement as complete from a flight perspective, while maybe there's still some control work to do. There might be a little bit of confusion that way, so it's going to require a little bit of management in order to keep these on track, but go ahead and try these out and see what you can get there. But like I said, it's a fantastic tool, being able to locate all of the requirements for your subgroup and be able to work with them that way. Next thing to show you is I can come in and select any one of these, and this hierarchy can just keep going down. You notice I can come in here and say Insert New. Chapter is still available. So that hierarchy can just kind of keep going down, subdividing sections as much as you need. And then maybe I want to add a chapter that's specific to just, I don't know, maybe the front wing or the tail wing, or I want to separate that even further. I can put in more chapters, and I can put requirements within requirements. So say there's several things that we as a team need to be able to accomplish to say that we have met one of our customers' requirements. So maybe we want to say, in order to meet this cruise speed goal, maybe I need to have a certain amount of propulsion, and I need to have wingspan, and we need to accomplish these other aspects. I could come in and put in sub-requirements here. And there's two things that you could do with that. I could call it a requirement, or I could actually insert a sub-requirement. Now these function essentially the same as requirements. There's a few other tools associated with these that you're welcome to go and learn, but we're not going to be covering it in this video. So we're going to say here, propulsion, I'm just going to say some sort of pounds force, and I can go ahead and create that as well. The main difference here is just that the icon is going to be different. It also is associated with these two icons here, which again, we're just not really going to cover in this video, but please go and look that up if you're interested in learning how these can cover a requirement. Now we have created the hierarchy. Let's look at some of the other options that are available to us here. Going to the right here, we're not going to worry about these. We know all of the classification of these requirements have to do with the function of the product, so we've left that classification. Let's look at this state section next. I'm going to go ahead and select the name of this cruise speed object, and we're going to pop it up in its own window. Okay, now we can see the hierarchy that's only associated with that object. And now what I can see here is, just like it's still saying here it's in work, I can actually come up here and change its maturity on our little scale here. There are 5 stages of maturity that a requirement will sit in. There's private, in work, frozen, released, or obsolete. Now essentially what that means, when it's a private requirement, that means that only the person who created the requirement is going to be able to see it. You don't really ever need to make it private in your team. There's not really going to be a lot of call for that. Essentially the way that it works is we have a private, meaning it's only available to one member. In work means that it's a requirement that you as a team are still working towards. If it's frozen, that essentially just means that all of the information on this requirement is finalized, and you're going to freeze the requirement so that people can still see it, but no one can go in and accidentally change some detail on it. Basically, once you've said that it's frozen, you're saying, hey, that one is accomplished. We've met our goal. We've met that requirement. We don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm going to mark it as frozen. It'll show up this way in our list, and we can move on to focus on other things. Released means that a product meeting this requirement has been released to the public. And obsolete, well, that should make sense to you. It just means the requirement no longer matters. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put it back in work. There's no real reason to leave this in frozen unless we've already met that requirement. And there it goes. Now, one thing that I wasn't really able to show you here was that outside of private, in-work, and frozen, the sub-requirements are actually kind of unique in this sense. If I had gone and tried to go to released, it would give me a warning saying, hey, you haven't accomplished one of your sub-requirements yet, therefore the main requirement shouldn't be accomplished yet. So if I try to go to release, that's really saying everything's final. No more changes are even possible on this, and it's going to notice that, hey, there's still a sub-requirement that you need to accomplish make sure you do that before we move this forward. So that's one nice feature of these sub-requirements. Now I've shown you how to create the requirements, how to subdivide your hierarchy. I've shown you how to edit details on each of these requirements, including things like the difficulty and the priority. So that can be something you can change as your project moves forward. And there's a few other details here, including the owner, the classification, etc., that you can change here as well. Now there's one last detail that I want to show you about this. Let's open this pitch 40 degrees item instead. And what I want to show you is how to create a parameter for this requirement. So if I pull this up, this is all I see. It's essentially the same page, and again I can select this item, come up here, and I can still insert new things. It's just kind of blanked out all of the other information so I can just focus in on one requirement. But all of these items also have another menu that's a little bit hidden. It's this one up here. This is kind of a tree view looking at the hierarchy. I'm going to come up here and open some of the other properties that I can adjust for this item. So for this requirement, we want to add a parameter, which is just some additional information that's going to go along with this. I'm going to come down here to Properties, and here I can see the All Parameters section, and I can create a new parameter. Now the purpose of parameters is just to focus on the detail information, the number that's going to be associated with this requirement. But it's also possible through 3D Experience to create a requirement parameter in this view and then open that parameter within your 3D model and connect it as a measurement for one of your parts. So for example, if we're looking at this pitch requirement and we realize that, hey, this means that the control surfaces on the tail are going to have to be, oh, I don't know, 12 inches long, you could come in here, create that parameter, 12-inch tail control surface, and then use that in your model. This is one of those functionalities that makes 3D Experience such a powerful tool, is the connections between the different apps. So let's create that parameter. So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm just going to make that exact one I just said. So tail control surface. And I could add a description if I want. This one will not be an angle, this is going to be a length. Let's go ahead and put it in inches. I can put in a roll or a priority on this as well. I'm not going to worry about those. And here I can come down here to values. There are several options we can do here. I'm just going to leave that on simple value. And I can come in here and say 12 inches. And I can also come in here and put in a minimal value, so we'll say 11, and a max, which gives us kind of our range of where this might work, but focusing on that value being the parameter. Finally, I could come down here and add tolerances. If I have that much information, I'm just going to leave it this way and say OK, and it'll pop that into my tree. And there we go. There's our parameter, there we go, get our title right there, and I can just come in here and stretch that out. And now I have a measurement associated with that requirement. So this is a nice way, again, to get some of those measurements within the framework of your requirement. You can kind of look through with your requirements and see what values attach, what items you need to work out in order to kind of move down and determine some of the measurements, some of the numbers that go with your model. And with that, we have covered the basic functionality of building a structure for your requirements. As always, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Thanks.